Hello there, 5'9" gamers! With Pokemon Unite on the way, we figured it would be a good idea to sit down and talk about what MOBAs are and how they work, so anyone who's just jumping into Pokemon Unite as their first MOBA will have an easier time. While each MOBA has their own differences, this guide is focused on Pokemon Unite. While we will speak very generally about most MOBAs and some of the things you'll find in each, keep in mind that it can vary from game to game, and that these aren't hard and fast rules. But before we get into everything, if you enjoy the content on our channel, make sure to like the video, sub to the channel, and click the bell button to be notified whenever we post a video. Now without further ado, welcome to the beginner's guide to multiplayer online battle arenas. So what are MOBAs? Like we mentioned a bit before, MOBA stands for Multiplayer Online Battle Arena, and it's essentially any game where each player chooses a unit or champion, and the game is made up of two teams, one or more lanes, and towers or bases that defend each lane. Lanes, a pathway from one's team base to the other. MOBAs can have varying numbers of lanes, but the standard is 3. The lanes are usually referred to as top, mid, or bottom, based on where they're placed on the map. Many games in this genre share similarities with a couple big differences. If you've played League of Legends, Dota, or Smite, you've played a MOBA before, just to name a few. Your goal in a MOBA is to defend your side while continually pushing into your opponents. Think of it like a game of tug of war, where you want to constantly be taking more of the rope. In most, if not all MOBAs, as you push, you encounter towers. Towers. Areas of the map that need to be defeated to proceed. They defend lanes and sometimes attack players, depending on the game. Towers usually give their players a buff when fighting in the tower's range, and Unite is no different. Towers will continually heal any teammates that are inside them, and that means you need to be strategic about when you go to push into an enemy's tower. In most MOBAs, you have creeps or minions to help you. Minions, or creeps. Small creatures that spawn from your base and continually move forward down lanes unless they're killed. Most MOBAs have you kill your enemy's minions while protecting your own in order to eventually overwhelm the tower. Minions are also the main way to gain experience, so a lot of the strategy can go into how you approach minions. Some games will even allow you to deny your opponent experience by killing your own minions first. Now, Unite is a little bit different. There are creatures that spawn for experience, but only a select few of them can actually be used to push forward into towers. Most are static and don't move much from their spawn spot. This means that pushing a tower may require ending your opponent outside of their tower, sneaking into their tower when they're not looking, or overwhelming your opponent inside their tower with a higher level or with teammates. Now, most games in a MOBA go through 3 distinct phases naturally: the early game, the mid game, and the late game. The early game typically consists of leveling to try to get your first ultimate skill as quickly as possible, while at the same time trying to take a little advantage over your opponent whenever you can. The mid-game usually starts once a couple towers are gone, and it's where you'll see a lot of team fights start to happen, although we'll talk more about those later on in this video. The late game is where teams will try to push every advantage they have to finish off their opponents. Every second matters, and dying here can be costly. While each of these can be rather long in most MOBAs, Pokemon Unite's 10-minute timer means that each phase will go by quickly. That's why it's even more important to be aware of what phase you're in and what's happening around you. Now, you're going to want to enter the game with a good team, and that means everyone picking a role and knowing what they should do. Much like Among Us, every player has a job to do and will instead spend the whole game stabbing each other. But good players will stick to their tasks, or at least be more strategic about their stabbing. ADC stands for Attack Damage Carry, and you can think of these as your primary DPS characters. They're squishy and they deal a lot of damage, however, not at first. At the beginning of the game, the ADC player's job is to get strong quickly and avoid dying while they do it. So, ADCs are typically trying to last hit enemies to grow quicker. Last hit. When you get the last hit on an enemy and get bonus experience or loot for it. They're trying to get as much experience as they possibly can while still defending their lanes against the other team. But because they're so squishy, ADC players need to be very aware of their current strength, opposing players' strength, and their own positioning. Nothing worse for an ADC than getting killed and falling behind in levels. In some games, the ADC will typically go to fight in the safe lane, which is usually safer to farm than others. Go figure. In Unite, ADCs are, well, attackers. Now, to get the job done, ADCs usually need to be paired with a support. Supports heal, buff, and do a lot of other things to help other units. They're usually relatively squishy and are there to make it so that the rest of the team can thrive. They shouldn't be as focused on leveling as much and should almost never be getting the last hit. However, they should still contribute to kill to gain some experience. Supports do well when they keep their teammates from dying and help the ADC grow big and strong. Think of yourself as a babysitter for a child that keeps wanting to jump into traffic. You're there to hold their hand and help them cross when the light is green. In that same vein, you'll keep your teammates protected when they push a tower. You'll also be the difference in a lot of team fights. Supports can vary in the ways they help out their team depending on the game and the characters, but their primary job is to help others, not themselves. Supports in Unite are supporter Pokemon. Another type of character that can support the team in different ways is the tank. Tanks in MOBAs function the same way as they do in other games. They're here to eat damage for the squishy folks. They have high HP and are usually a bit slow. They can put out respectable damage, but less than the main DPS roles like the ADC. They can support with shields and CC. CC, crowd control. These are abilities that negatively affect the enemy team's movement. These can be stuns, slows, and pushes. They can sometimes pair with ADC instead of the support, or they can be in their own lane with other roles. Tanks are generally a little bit flexible. They're really strong in the early game, but become worse later on when the ADCs are doing more damage than they can reasonably soak up. Tanks in Unite are defenders, and are ones that have high endurance stats. While tanks have little flexibility, these next ones are all about being flexible. We're using the Unite term here as not every game has this role, but these characters are balanced. They're meant to be able to fit in any lane and do decently, at least in theory. In practice, you'll see them fitting more DPS-related roles like the ADC or the jungler. Wait, before we can talk about this one, let's rewind a bit and talk about the map. Okay, so let's talk about this little area in between the lanes. This is commonly known as the jungle. The jungle is a really important place as it's where characters can face special enemies for buffs. It's also the easiest way to move between lanes, and enemy players are often hidden from the map when they're traveling through it. That's why you need a dedicated player patrolling the jungle and making sure to gank enemy team. Gank. An ambush. When an enemy team comes out of nowhere and makes your life non-existent. So now let's talk about the jungler again. So the jungler's job is to patrol the jungle, get buffs, and jump into lanes to help start team fights. Some of the best characters for this are the ones with high mobility and good offense. Characters can quickly come in, get a kill, and leave. In Unite, the best units for this are speedsters. Now the jungle enemies tend to be a little stronger than a lot of characters can handle at the beginning, so it's not a bad idea to start in a lane and then move into the jungle after you've gotten a few levels. You don't want to take too much of your ADC's experience, or you risk slowing them down, so try to only take what you need before you go. Once you've cleared out the jungle of its buffs and are waiting on the enemies to respawn, try checking in on your other lanes. Most jungles have areas where you can hide and see the nearby lane, and Pokemon Unite is no different. Any patch of grass will hide you. Start there and check on the situation in a lane of your choosing. If there's a teammate, hop into the lane and use your presence to help out other teammates, putting more pressure on the enemy players. If you find that your teammates are pushing, feel free to help them push for a bit so you can all take the tower. If you find that your teammates are being overwhelmed, assess the situation and see if your presence will actually help. If you can help them turn the fight around, or if you can flank them and get a couple kills, run over and finish off the enemies. However, if you think that you'll just die too, it's better to go in a different lane. Teammates dying is unfortunate, but you don't want to add your own body to the pile. So you want to avoid death, eh? Well,
death comes for us all.
Until then, it's important to approach team fights correctly. The first thing to think about is whether you should engage in a fight at all. If the enemy players are clearly stronger than you or outnumber you, winning a team fight will be extremely difficult. If anything, it'll likely end in your death and then your team yelling at you for being a feeder. Feeding. Continually dying and giving the enemy team easy points or experience. If you can't tell, It's a good idea to only voice chat with friends when playing these kinds of games. People get really toxic. Before starting a fight, you should also be aware of how a losing enemy is likely going to escape, as well as how you're going to prevent that. If you know the best way for them to escape the fight is to the north, try engaging them from a direction so you can pressure them away from there. This comes with the added benefit that you can escape that way if your team fight doesn't go as planned. Now, of course, you don't always get to choose when to fight, as the enemies will occasionally make a move on you. If you're defending a lane, these factors are still things you should be thinking about, even when you're not actively engaged in a fight. You can quickly judge how likely it is that you're going to be blown away when those two enemies and their jungler start running towards you. If you've been really keeping up the pressure and you know that the enemies you're facing are weaker than you, stand your ground and push back. But if you know they have the advantage, retreat into your tower and let your tower help even the odds. Now it's time to talk about ganking. While we'll be focusing on the jungler, as they tend to be the main type of character running around ganking enemies, you should know that other roles can also do this. Sometimes supports can leave their lane for a bit to help gank another lane, but generally that's more about initiating so that the DPS roles can clean up. It also can be a way to temporarily help out a struggling lane. It often comes down to a judgment call for other roles, as leaving your post can negatively impact your lane. But as a jungler, you're looking for easy targets that you can pick off with a gank before you run back into the jungle. That means junglers need to be able to judge possible teamfights. However, you get an advantage as the jungler, the element of surprise. The enemies may be pushing towards your team tower, but they're only calculating what's in front of them, what they can see. They may push a little too far forward, sometimes even right next to your tower with not a lot of room to run. These are the types of enemies that you want to grab. You'll also want to look for people who are underleveled. The support is generally a great target as they're both squishy and can't put up that strong of a fight back. If they're separated from their partner, it's easy pickings. Now, on the opposite end, you can reduce the amount of times you get caught in a gank by being more aware of the enemy units and their positions. While most games won't let you see the jungler while they're in the jungle, you should keep an eye on the map to see when they pop out. If the jungler is over in another lane, you know it's much less likely that you'll be ganked and you can play a little riskier. When you can't see the jungler, you need to know that there's a possibility that they'll be waiting for you to slip up. And in those situations, play a little safer and don't make yourself an easy target. While ganking is generally done by the jungler, let's talk about roaming teams and bad ganking. It's an annoyance that happens in every MOBA at the lower levels. If the entire enemy team is in the jungle and just popping out to get kills, they're having fun, but they aren't properly farming or leveling. You just need to play normally and push the lanes. If you use the time to build up safely, you'll outpace them in the long term. In a lot of MOBAs, there's a special type of boss that'll spawn in the middle of the jungle. It's often a very difficult enemy, but it gives an amazing buff. Many teams need to devote 3 or more of their members to actually take it down. However, you need to be prepared for a team fight. With such an immense potential buff, and because the boss is difficult and will wear you down, the other team may want to gank you while you're fighting and then take the buff once they win. It can definitely make things tough, so you need to be sure you're devoting enough of your team to handle that possibility as well. Depending on the game, this jungle boss can make or break your team's strategy completely. You may need to be prepared to drop everything and go help your team when these buffs are available. And that is going to wrap it up for the basics on how to play MOBAs effectively. There's obviously a lot more to each specific game, and we want to get into the details on those in future videos if you all want. But in the meantime, we hope this helps you. Check out more of our videos on 5-9 Gaming for more content, and be sure to check back when Pokemon Unite releases, as we'll definitely be making more content for that on the channel. Until then, see you all next time.